A young Indigenous woman vanishes while researching Canada's missing and murdered, only to become one of them. The tragic irony of Loretta Saunders' case exposes a dark reality no one saw coming. Loretta Saunders was a 26-year-old Inuk woman with a brilliant academic mind and a heart for justice. Born in Labrador, Canada, she was studying criminology at St. Mary's University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and focusing her thesis on the national crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, MIW. She was passionate, determined, and deeply proud of her heritage. But in February 2014, Loretta became the very subject she was researching, her own name added to the growing list of Indigenous women who had vanished or been killed. Raised in Newfoundland and Labrador, Loretta faced significant challenges, from poverty to systemic barriers. Yet, she fought to overcome them through education. Her goal was to shine a light on the MMIW crisis, giving a voice to women who were ignored by law enforcement and media. Her research and advocacy were deeply personal. She often said, "These women matter. Their stories matter." She was more than a student. She was becoming a symbol of resilience. On February 13th, 2014, Loretta visited an apartment she had rented to a couple, Blake Leggett and Victoria Henberry. She was there to collect overdue rent. It was broad daylight. After that, Loretta was never heard from again. Her sudden disappearance set off alarms for her family and boyfriend, who knew she would never just vanish. When she missed an important university meeting and stopped responding to messages, a missing person responsible. Police quickly discovered Loretta's blue Toyota in Ontario, being driven by Blake and Victoria. They were arrested for theft, but suspicions quickly escalated. Something was wrong. They had no plausible explanation for why they had her car or why Loretta was missing. Their stories changed with every interview. As detectives dug deeper, the horrifying truth came to light. Blake Leggett eventually confessed. Loretta had come to the apartment to collect rent. An argument broke out. Here's the continuation and full wrap-up of. Blake Leggett eventually confessed. When Loretta arrived to collect overdue rent, an argument turned violent. Leggett attacked her, strangling her to death. His girlfriend, Victoria Henberry, didn't intervene. Instead, she helped hide the crime. They placed Loretta's body in a hockey bag and stuffed it into the trunk of her own car. 4 days, they drove across provinces, passing through Quebec and into New Brunswick. Eventually, they dumped her body in a wooded area off the Trans-Canada Highway near Salisbury. Police tracked the couple after discovering inconsistencies in their stories and tracing Loretta's vehicle. Once her remains were located, both were arrested. Blake Leggett pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received life without parole for 25 years. Victoria Henberry pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life with no parole eligibility for 10 years. Loretta's family delivered emotional impact statements in court, highlighting the pain of losing a daughter who had tried to make the world better for others. Loretta's murder resonated across Canada. She had been researching missing and murdered Indigenous women, MMIW, and became a tragic part of the very crisis she aimed to expose. Her story intensified calls for a national inquiry into MMIW. Her death became a symbol of the systemic violence and racism faced by Indigenous women. In her memory, her family established the Loretta Saunders Community Scholarship, helping Indigenous students pursue education and justice. Loretta Saunders wanted justice. She wanted Indigenous voices to be heard. In death, her voice became louder than ever, echoing in protests, classrooms, and the halls of power. She was not just a victim. She was a warrior, and her fight lives on. Loretta's murder didn't just devastate her family. It shook the conscience of a country. Her case highlighted everything activists have been saying for years, that Indigenous women were disproportionately targeted, ignored, and devalued by Canadian systems. Media coverage had often been lacking when Indigenous women went missing, but Loretta, bright, university-educated, and researching this very crisis, forced the media and the public to finally take notice. Vigils were held across Canada. Indigenous communities gathered to mourn her and demand change. Posters with Loretta's face were placed beside those of dozens, hundreds, of other missing and murdered Indigenous women. She became both a name and a symbol. Years of advocacy, fueled in part by the tragedy of Loretta Saunders, eventually led to the * National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, launched in 2016. The inquiry's final report in 2019 called the violence a Canadian genocide. It identified deep-rooted colonialism, systemic racism, and the failure of law enforcement as key causes behind the violence. It confirmed what Loretta had already known and what she gave her life trying to change. Her work became part of that national conversation. Professors, students, and researchers still cite her unfinished thesis. In many ways, her academic legacy outlived her physical one. Loretta's family, especially her siblings, have remained vocal advocates. They turned their grief into activism, urging others to never stop saying her name and to keep fighting for justice. Her sister, Delilah Saunders, became a powerful voice for Indigenous rights. She has spoken internationally about Loretta's story and the systemic failures that enabled it. Her courage led to policy conversations on police response, missing persons legislation, and Indigenous-led support systems. Loretta Saunders is not just another name on a tragic list. She was a scholar, a daughter, a sister, and a warrior. When Loretta disappeared, her family immediately feared the worst, but media coverage was initially sparse. It wasn't until her killers were arrested and the case turned sensational that national outlets picked up the story. This delay reflected a bitter truth. Indigenous women in Canada often go missing without widespread attention. Loretta's case became a glaring example of the media's selective coverage. Her family had to fight to keep her name in headlines. Delilah Saunders, Loretta's sister, stepped forward as an activist, challenging both public institutions and journalism standards. Loretta was human, brilliant kind. Why did the world wait until she was dead to care? In 2016, Loretta's story became one of the cases referenced during the National *MIG, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, inquiry in Canada. Her work, both as a student and as a symbol, was cited in policy papers, vigils, and protests across the country. Her thesis, incomplete at the time of her death, was posthumously published by St. Mary's University. Professors and peers honored her with an honorary degree and described her as a scholar who embodied truth and justice. The Simmons case also spotlighted systemic failures, lack of early police intervention, social safety gaps, and the absence of support for Indigenous tenants, students, and renters. Loretta had been couch surfing before renting her unit to the couple who would later kill her. Her murder wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a cultural loss. Another Indigenous woman silenced by a society that too often looked away. Since Loretta's death, Delilah Saunders has become a fierce voice for change. She has spoken at United Nations forums and Indigenous summits, demanding justice reform, data transparency, and equal protections for Indigenous women. Delilah herself suffered major health setbacks, including a liver failure scare, and had a battle not only for justice but for basic healthcare access as an Indigenous woman. Still, she continues Loretta's mission. My sister was doing the work. It's on us now to finish it. Today, murals of Loretta grace community centers and universities. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, Indigenous communities across Canada hold vigils in her name. Her story is now taught in classrooms as a powerful case study of intersectional violence, racism, sexism, and systemic neglect. She is remembered not only as a victim, but as a researcher, daughter, sister, and advocate. Loretta Saunders wanted to document the truth. In the end, she became the truth the country could no longer ignore. Asterisk, asterisk. Her life sparked change. Her story demands memory. And her legacy is louder than silence. Legacy beyond justice. Loretta's death left a permanent scar, not just on her family, but on the conscience of a nation. She was more than a student, more than a statistic. She was a woman who had dedicated her life to exposing a tragic reality and became its most haunting proof. Her murder reawakened hard questions in Canadian society. Why do Indigenous women go missing at such alarming rates? Why are their cases underreported and underinvestigated? And what will it take for real, lasting change? Across Canada, Loretta's name became a rallying cry in marches, vigils, and calls to action. People carried signs that read, "Justice for Loretta," and asterisk, "She spoke for us. Now we speak for her." Asterisk,